Hello, my name is Cian O'Driscoll. I'm an editor at the Review of International Studies, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Sara Wong. Sara is currently completing her PhD at the LSE, and we're speaking to her this morning in connection with her CPD award-winning article. Sara, welcome. Thanks for coming to talk to us.
Thanks so much for having me.
And thank you first of all for your article. Thoroughly enjoyed reading it. Our panel was hugely impressed. And we want to talk to you a little bit more about the article and share it with our audience. But before that, I wanted to ask you a little bit about yourself. What is it that brought you into writing a PhD in international relations?
Yeah, so I think like most people that study international relations at a doctoral level, I didn't come from studying international relations. What brought me to IR as a kind of discipline was from my previous work of commissioning and producing artwork as part of and related to projects addressing humanitarian issues. So building off of that experience, I was really interested in kind of carving out the space to actually be able to read, think, and write about the politics of cultural and creative production. So I kind of came to IR with that kind of thirst for interdisciplinarity. And I wanted a space to be able to think about questions of politics and the international, but also an intellectual space where I could, pull from arts and humanities approaches or cultural studies, for example. So I've really found a home in the kind of heterogeneity of the discipline, and that's what originally brought me here.
And would you say the article is one, I suppose, iteration of your attempt to do this, and perhaps you tell us a little bit more about the article itself?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so definitely. So the article is called Towards an Anticolonial Aesthetic Politics, Epistemic Refusal and Surrealist Praxis. And in the article, what I'm aiming to do is to bring together the so-called aesthetic turn in IR and broader questions of art and politics and their co-constitution with anti-colonial thought. So in doing that, I kind of develop a theoretical framework working with surrealist thinkers and writers and practitioners from Martinique. So I look at the writing of Suzanne Césaire, Aimé Césaire, and René Ménil specifically. And I develop a kind of theoretical approach using their writings around surrealism, but also anti-colonialism, into a kind of broader framework that I call epistemic refusal, which is both a refusal of colonial rule within their specific political context, but also a kind of refusal of Enlightenment, rationally bound epistemes. So I then apply that framework to the specific artwork of an artist called Sai, who is someone that was displaced from Myanmar following the 2021 coup. And I try to understand and think with the surrealists that I'm thinking through, but also try to place that into conversation in a very urgent contemporary political context. And what I really argue and what I'm trying to articulate is that thinking with aesthetics and art is also beyond thinking about just kind of artistic representations of the political, but actually thinking about what aesthetics do and how they move in the world.
And while I can think of a few people in the field who have engaged, just a handful who have engaged surrealists, and a few more maybe who have engaged aesthetics, I don't think there's very much which puts them together, certainly and addresses them to international relations. So how does this article speak to the field, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think in bringing those conversations together, that's one way that it does speak to the field more broadly. But also I think it shows and demonstrates a way for anti-colonial, decolonial, and post-colonial thought to be taken seriously in questions of, again, political and international constitution beyond just questions of the colonial. So I think what I'm grappling with in the article is how can we actually engage with these literatures and what they say, thinking about colonial logics and structures, but also what they might say to culture, to aesthetics. So I'm trying to use and work with their writings in what normally might be engaged with empirically. So you might analyze poems as the kind of empirical focus, but I'm really trying to center them in my actual theoretical framework. So I think that's the move that I'm trying to make.
Maybe a slightly oblique question in some ways for you, but they say it takes a village to write a PhD. And given that you're doing some pretty difficult things here in terms of initiating or brokering conversations that don't typically take place within the auspices of BISA and of international studies, what kind of academic communities have you relied upon or uplift you, and that you in turn would look to uplift through this kind of work?
I would say that I think my sense of it is that the discipline is changing, right, and is becoming increasingly sympathetic to approaches like mine and topics like mine. So that's been really, affirming to feel like I'm kind of part of that, a very small part of that, but part of that as well. But I really value the kind of interdisciplinary academic circles that I've been able to engage with. So I guess I'm thinking specifically about IPS as a growing kind of community, and then also other scholars that are broadly interested in my empirical focus in Southeast Asia specifically, and the study of Myanmar in the contemporary moment, and also the kind of focus on experiences of diaspora and exile. So I've found home in those different areas, and I've also found it really interesting to be in conversation with other doctoral students that are housed within a broader kind of arts and humanities area as well. So I'm funded by the AHRC, so it means that I'm able to be a part of a wider network of English lit students, visual arts students. So that's really helpful.
Humanities more broadly.
Yeah.
So I find it just fascinating. This CPD also has been, I think, a huge part of this conversation, and certainly for us, dipping in and engaging with, having the luxury of reading your article and the articles submitted by Jamal and by Alice too. But coming back to yours particularly, I work in Canberra, so Myanmar is, relatively speaking, not that far away, and it's something which I know is on the minds of a lot of my colleagues at the ANU. You might say a little something to us about how we can talk about such a serious issue as what's happened in Myanmar through the lens or through the prism of art and aesthetics, which some people might be predisposed to dismiss as flippant or not serious. I'm going to presume that you have a response to those people.
Yeah,
the more creative way of putting it is why is art and why is the aesthetic such an illuminating?
Are we playing dead? Sorry, I think I threw that.
No.
Why does art matter?
Why is art an illuminating interface or practice for understanding some of the quite disturbing and unsettling things that we've witnessed in Myanmar the last couple of years?
It's a really big question and an important one that I'm kind of trying to address in my wider doctoral research and after as well. I think, and I guess I'm still getting there, but I think it's because it allows us to relate to and understand what's happening politically, whether those are experiences of displacement, exile, incarceration. I mean, I'm talking specifically about experiences that people that I'm in conversation with in my research have experienced firsthand or their families experienced firsthand. It allows us to actually engage with those issues and not those issues, but those experiences, really, those human experiences at a fundamental emotional and affective level, in ways that I think sometimes other registers fail to get at, right? So that's what I'm orienting towards. Is what that register is and how aesthetics allow us to move there. And
if you'd be so kind, I've got one final question for you, which is kind of double header, and it's about looking ahead. And I'm curious about where you're going with your own research, in your PhD perhaps, but also beyond if you choose. And then selfishly, I was wondering if you would have any advice or exhortations for people working on journals in international relations, for what kind of research, or any advice or guidance you would have for what you think the field needs.
So in terms of my own research, where I'm going within my PhD is, again, thinking specifically about cultural articulations of the political and how to wrestle with these questions, as is evident in my article, but will be in my larger research as well. I'm really interested in what anti-colonial thought and Black studies has to say about these questions. And again, within the wider context of my current research, I'm also particularly focused on how experiences of displacement and exile fit into that kind of wider puzzle. In terms of going forward, I'm really interested in pushing these questions further in terms of the actual sites that I'm looking at. So I want to start to think beyond kind of the cultural sites that I'm currently looking at. So beyond the gallery, beyond the museum, how do everyday kind of articulations of the aesthetic come into how we relate internationally, right? As is our discipline. Which is why it was really great to read and engage with Jamal's work, because I think his paper does such a good job of thinking about those everyday articulations, right, in more of a kind of popular sense. So that's where I'm broadly going. Where in terms of advice for editors, if I can give any, I mean, I would just kind of turn it back to this very scheme and just say how valuable it's been for me as an ECR to be a part of this. So kind of just to say more of things like this that allow us the space to think about how we can actually translate and transform our research into a publishable format, because the dissertation is very different from an article, right? Exactly. And there's a lot of unknowns and I think there's also a lot of like unspoken norms, right, that go into these that go into thinking about how we actually make our work digestible.
How you parlay it into a published article.
Exactly. How we actually communicate it with the wider, intellectual or broader public. So just having these kinds of schemes that really mentor us through that process is so valuable. So more of this, basically.
Well, more of this for us too. Your paper was wonderful. It was a joy to read, and thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sarah.